Hey everyone, this is John Carnell from the Genesys Cloud Development Engagement Team, and I'm here with the new DevDrop series. I'm super excited to share this series with you guys because it's going to introduce a brand new piece of integration technology to Genesys Cloud called Genesys Cloud Functions. And it's going to open up a whole new way of integrating Genesys Cloud architect flows with third-party resources and your own custom business logic. For those of you who are familiar with Genesys Cloud, we've always used Genesys Cloud Data Actions as a way to call out to resources outside of the Genesys Cloud ecosystem from within our architect flows and in our scripts. In the past, Genesys Cloud Data Functions could be used to call other resources directly via a REST API, AWS Lambda, or Google Cloud Function. But sometimes our customers have been asking for tighter control over the business logic that's being executed. It's great to be able to call out to a third-party resource and grab some data back, but sometimes you have to do common integration patterns like a gather, scatter, or scatter, gather pattern and be able to pull and massage the data to go and get the information that you want back. Or you might want to have tighter control over how your API is actually being invoked. For instance, many organizations now require a zero trust network, and you have to be able to inject your own third-party signed certificates into your API, outbound API calls in order to validate the identity and authenticate the identity of the client calling the API. In the past, data actions just simply used HTTPS. They called out without doing it and used their own certificates. So you weren't able to do those things. But all of this is now possible because Genesys Cloud Functions allow you to basically upload your own code into Genesys Cloud and execute that code. So let's go ahead and take a look at the architecture of a Genesys Cloud function. Now, data actions are the entry point in the Genesys Cloud functions. A data action basically is going to provide the input and output contracts that are going to be passed to the function. It's also going to provide some basic data mapping into the function. Now, once a data action is invoked, the code is going to be able to execute, and that code is going to be the code that you upload into our data action is going to execute. It's basically going to allow you to carry out your own custom business logic. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. Is one, that code that is executing in a sandboxed AWS environment that's separate from the rest of our Genesys Cloud environments. We currently only support one runtime in this environment, and that is a JavaScript runtime. Now, that doesn't mean you can't, that you're limited to JavaScript. It just means that you have to compile down the JavaScript. So for instance, if you wanted to write your functions using TypeScript, there's nothing really stopping you there. But once that code is executing, it basically can communicate externally with the outside world, and it can execute its own custom business logic. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. Is one, we don't actually log anything that's going on during the normal functioning of your function as it's executing within a data action. However, we do allow you to test and debug it by going into the Genesys Cloud UI and being able to manually test your function out there. And what that allows you to do then is see the input and output logs and the last 4 kilobytes of console log access that you might have written out. That information is only available to you. It's not actually available to Genesys Cloud users, and it will not be available during runtime. So there's a lot of pieces to getting the Genesys Cloud functions up and running. So rather than sitting here and trying to do it all in one video, we're going to break this out into a series of videos. And to build and deploy a Genesys Cloud function, we're really going to need to take 4 steps. The first step is to configure Genesys Cloud to not only set up the permissions, but we're also going to walk you through how to set up a Genesys Cloud integration and how to set up your Genesys Cloud Data Action. Now, a Genesys Cloud integration is like a credential store. You, as a Genesys Cloud consumer, can upload sensitive information like certificates or passwords that are needed to invoke an API, or a key that's needed to invoke an API, and that's not accessible to anybody but you. And it's one way. Once it's uploaded, you can't see it. It's available to you and your data actions, but nobody in Genesys Cloud support can ever get those items out of there. Now, once the integrations are set up, our data action itself is going to be defining the input and output contracts of what's going to be passed to the function. So we're going to set up our data action as a shell initially, and then we're going to switch over to actually building and writing our function. So in the second dev drop, what we're going to do is we're going to write and test our functionality locally using the serverless framework. Now, the serverless framework is a framework that's used traditionally to write AWS Lambdas. And we follow the same basic pattern in serverless of being able to write your function that you want to have executed. However, we're really only using the serverless framework to test your function locally, allow you to invoke it, and to package it locally. There's no requirement that you have to use serverless to build this, but you will be responsible then for packaging up your zip file. So to keep things simple, we often tell people, hey, stick with the serverless framework and try it out and use it for what it's to help you jumpstart your function development. Now, the third thing is deploying the function to Genesys Cloud. Now, when we deploy a function to Genesys Cloud, because this is in beta, we don't yet have a UI that we're going to use to go out there and deploy the Genesys Cloud function. So what I'm going to show you is how to go and take that packaged up zip file that you created earlier from running your function locally, and then using the Genesys Cloud CLI to basically go and deploy your function. Now, once your function's actually been deployed to your Genesys Cloud instance, we're going to go out and test the function inside of the data action. We're going to use the Genesys Cloud UI. We're going to go and execute our function. And then I'll show you guys how to look at the logs and be able to see the inputs and outputs of what's going on. So with that, that's the end of our introductory DevDrop video. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. And I'm going to be walking us through these other 4 steps in other DevDrops. But thanks, and I hope everybody has a great day.